They had to roll out the vaccine and they had to fix national quarantine. Now, instead of rolling out the vaccine to the Australian people, they've just concentrated on rolling each other. The rolling of Michael McCormack, a decent human being, by Barnaby Joyce represents the sixth combination of Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister under the 8 long years of this government. It's a vote of no confidence in their own government. And the fact is, if you want to end this circus, it's time to end this government. I've seen governments be self-indulgent before, and they get punished. This is a government that is being self-indulgent at a time of a pandemic. The last time there was a spill was in the middle of the bushfire crisis. This time it's in the middle of a pandemic. In the middle of a pandemic where the Prime Minister had a phone hook-up with state premiers today in order to shift blame for his failure to roll out supply of the vaccine. The fact is that today we have now, I think we're up to the 24th breach of hotel quarantine. 24 breaches. And yet we still have a government that says it can't fix national quarantine. And when it comes to vaccine, we have a failure to roll it out because they're too interested in focusing on themselves, too interested in congratulating themselves, saying they're at the front of the queue, and other nonsense which just is not true. There's been no reason given for the rolling of the leader of the National Party other than self-indulgence and a power-hungry mob engaging in internal politics at a time where we should be focused on what happens outside this building, not focused on what happens inside.
Mr Albanese, does this warrant, in your view, an early election? Is it time to get rid of this mob? You can stop
I'm ready whenever the election's called. If their early election is called, as I've said before, it'll be because this government doesn't think it's capable of serving a full 3-year term.
Does this make your job easier or harder?
I'm focused on the needs of the Australian people. I'll lead the Australian people to look at the circus that is occurring opposite, whereby we've now had, we began, of course, with, I might miss one or two here, but I think we began with Abbott and Truss, and then we had Turnbull and Truss, and then we had Turnbull and Joyce, and then we had Turnbull and McCormack, and then we had Morrison and McCormack, and now we have Morrison and Joyce. Seriously, all of that in 3 terms, and from a government that does not have an agenda. Even prior to the pandemic, we had wages that hadn't risen during their 3 terms of office. We had productivity in decline. We had low growth. We had no social policy agenda, and we know that we've had more than 20 energy policies without any of them being landed. They have no future agenda for this country. They just have an agenda for themselves. And the fact that they're returning to the Cabinet, Bridget McKenzie, the architect of sports rorts, the Prime Minister has to explain how that's tenable, given that those sports rorts occurred and she copped the blame and had to step aside for it. But there's no sin under this government, as people like Stuart Robert and Susan Ley can testify, which disqualify you from high office for more than a few months.
So if there were an election tomorrow, what would be your central pitch?
Our central pitch is that we're on the side of the Australian people, that we'll make sure that we have a strong economy that works for them, that we have job created in new industries, that we address the skills crisis in this country, that we tackle climate change, that we don't leave people behind and we don't hold people back, that we have an agenda for the future, dealing with the current crisis, but also dealing with a recovery that's stronger. Not just trying to build back to what was there before, but actually to focus on the needs of the Australian people and to end this circus. And one at a time, How
do you think the re-election of Barnaby Joyce will go down with female voters?
Well, I think that there is a host of Barnaby Joyce comments. One of the things I do find a little bit amusing is the attack on Michael McCormack for allegedly being not articulate enough. I mean, really? Really? Have people not had a look at what Barnaby Joyce has had to say and needed to decipher the comments over the years? Have a look at what he said about Bridget McKenzie when she chaired a Senate meeting. Have a look at the comments that he's made consistently. And I think, together with a whole range of issues and the failure of this government to address gender issues, not the least of which is the appalling treatment of Brittany Higgins on an ongoing basis that we've seen, with the failure to properly investigate and treat her with the respect that she deserves, I think that women will make their views very clear at the next election.
Will you take a stronger line on climate change and against net zero by 2050? What does that mean for your argument to Australian voters? What will you do in response or offer in response?
We're offering net zero emissions by 2050. No qualification, no weasel words, no jumping around and dancing around about shifting, maybe, perhaps. You know, we'd kind of like to get to 2050. I just found last week humiliating to have an Australian Prime Minister stand next to a British Prime Minister and the British Prime Minister say that Australia's policy was to have net zero emissions by 2050, and to have a journalist from Nine news organisation have to say, I gave the appropriate... One could get all nostalgic given today and say Fairfax, to have a journalist have to correct a British Prime Minister. I mean, what is going on in this country when an Australian Prime Minister representing our nation overseas can't articulate what the Australian policy is on the great global challenge that is dealing with climate change? And Australia is increasingly isolated. The fact is, the National Farmers Federation, the Business Council of Australia,